So we only have a few minutes for this panel, and then we're going to take a break and have a much larger panel. So you have two chances at this group, but they're incredible. These presentations have been incredible, so I want to open up quickly for questions from the audience. And I'm going to go here first, and we've got plenty, so.
Susan Apt from Portland. This is for Kelly. Kelly, are any of the aforementioned agencies addressing population control / birth control?
Four mentioned agencies.
Which agencies?
Which agencies?
UN agencies.
So many different agencies. And that's my question.
Okay. In terms of healthcare services that are provided by humanitarian agencies, they're comprehensive. They include reproductive health, for example, those that are subject, for example, to sexual, gender-based violence and the like. It's the panoply from immunization all the way to women's health and so on. So it's a broad range of services that partners provide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Up here.
Hi, Samantha Potter, United States Air Force Academy. My question is for Ms. Clements. Post-conflict, is the UNHCR working with the militaries of the coalition to create a post-conflict plan that would help those IDPs and refugees that want to return? Thank you.
Great question. We are always in preparation for a peace settlement, for the opportunity for people to be able to go home. And even well before that peace settlement comes, there's a whole lot of work that we engage with various governments and various parts of those governments. So whether or not it's military or civilian. For example, I'll give you a case in point. We talked a lot yesterday in particular about Syria and about prospects for peace in Syria, and with the great hope that actually we will be able to see peace in Syria before long. Agencies like ours and many others are already preparing now, for example, for returns and the possibility for people to return voluntarily and safely, and looking at various things. For example, I mean, we're not a development agency. We're obviously a humanitarian and protection agency, but working very closely with those development agencies. What will people need when they go back to their home areas in terms of being able to restart their lives? That is not something I think that civilian agencies alone will be able to provide, depending upon the context. In this one, it's a little too early to tell. In some, there has been heavy engagement from the military parts of various governments to help us. Thanks.
We have a question from a remote site. What does the future of refugees and IDPs look like with Putin and Trump as leaders? Richard in Portland. That's going to have to go to you, Kelly. You're the only, we've got immigration specialists here.
We work with governments all around the world in terms of making sure that refugees are able to seek protection, to seek aid, to seek a better future for their families in the cases that they are not able to return home. I can tell you that the United States has been, and this was mentioned earlier by Tim, a global leader in terms of humanitarian assistance and protection. They are the #1 humanitarian bilateral provider to agencies like ourselves. And even with some of the lower numbers that we heard this morning in terms of refugee resettlement, would still be the #1 refugee resettlement country in the world. So we're obviously engaged, open, trying to provide as much support as we can, and this is something that we'll continue to do around the world.
Let's go back here.
My name is Camille Mackler. I work for a grassroots immigrant rights group in New York. And my question is for Mr. Chishti and Mr. Kane. I understand the message of hope that you're trying to give. I've heard myself say it a lot of times. I was at JFK for 10 days coordinating legal services for those affected by the travel ban most recently. And I can tell you none of the families we worked with ever gave up on this idea that the US was a place that was worth coming to. But my coworkers and I, we haven't had a day off in over a month at this point. And there isn't a lot of hope in between us. And last night, 2 memos were leaked that have the signature of the US Secretary of Homeland Security that want to seek criminal prosecution of any parent who tried to have their child come out of a war-torn country and join them in the United States, that would deport thousands of people without even a hearing before an immigration judge, greatly increasing those numbers that we've seen for the last few years. Every day I wake up and I feel like I'm in a ring with 3 boxers coming at me and my hands are tied behind my back. I'm having a hard time in my own work carrying out the hope that you're putting up statistics for and saying is out there. So how do we address that? Because the people who are doing that work, I've been told as a lawyer, I am now a first responder over and over again. And there are days when I don't even know how I can go to work and face my own coworkers who are living this very personally.
Tim, I'm going to turn to you on that question.
Sure. Well, thank you for what you're doing. I think you know, every day you do make a difference. I take a very long-term view of this, and I think part of my long-term view is backward-looking. I remember debating Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren about Obama's executive actions, and she was celebrating how wonderful it was. This is a dangerous road to go down. We need to have Congress engaged on this issue. And as I said before, and I think we've heard echoed in a few comments, I see Democrats, some very cynical Democrats, including President Obama when he was in the Senate, sabotaging comprehensive reform. You read the history, and Ted Kennedy was furious at him because he wanted to keep the issue alive to help him get elected and point at the other side and say racist. And you see people on this side who want to point at the other side and not solve it either and say amnesty, amnesty, amnesty. We need Congress to grow up. We should not, to put a little lightheartedness on this, watching presidents do executive action, I'm teaching a teenager to drive right now with the stick shift and going from first gear to fourth gear to reverse. We need stability in our immigration policy so that families don't get caught in airports. It's ridiculous. And I think in particular, when even the White House administration doesn't know their own executive orders apply to green card holders. Green card holders stand for people that are legal, permanent residents. So to tell somebody who's a permanent resident who went back home, or I'm sorry, maybe went back to their origin country or anywhere on a vacation and then suddenly couldn't get back into the country, that wasn't honored, or that people who are students. So I'm very frustrated. I really appreciate the people who are on the ground doing the hard work, but I do take a long-term view. Let's get away from executive actions, and I think the courts are going to play an important role in saying what is constitutional and not, and that will take some time to work out. But it's going to put the pressure back on our members of Congress and in the Senate to really act.
Let's go up here, and then we'll come down here.
Hello, thank you for having this conference. It's been lovely. My name is Regina Coleman. I take classes at USM. Bear with me, I'm going to make a few general.
You can keep a short comment. That would be so appreciated
Okay.
by the rest of the short question. Excuse
A
me.
lot of times, Jewish and African American communities have worked together when it came to civil rights, like in the 1950s. But oftentimes, a lot of people as immigrant communities, they have a different priorities than some of the local communities that they have. And sometimes they rise up, whereas those local communities stay in that lower economic position. You're working for immigration rights and you feel that it's a good cause and people's rights and human rights should be protected. As those immigrants rise up and leave the communities that help with them, what's the investment that a lower income community, what should be their involvement in their investment for their future when those people are oftentimes leaves them behind?
That's a good question. Ms. Afar, I'm going to go to you on that question.
I'm not sure I quite understood it, but it's.
If I'm-
Do you want to say the last part of the question again?
I can try to interpret it a little bit. It's about sometimes immigrant communities come in and then sort of rise up, leaving sort of.
People are working together, but then as they get their rights, and as an immigrant, you have different priorities and different mindset when you come into success into a new country. So as you rise up, those that lower economic communities still sort of stay at the bottom. And so it's like, why should I fight for these people when you're going to rise up and leave anyway?
Yeah.
So I would just to frame it, there's a concern that there's many of the immigrants who come to the United States are lower skill immigrants. Now I've taken the position that whether you're a high skill immigrant or low skill immigrant, you make America stronger. There are a lot of people that think high skill immigrants are great, but low skill immigrants, they put too much pressure and they hurt the wages of native born Americans who maybe didn't graduate from high school. That's the framing.
I heard this differently. I mean, I don't think I think it's a very serious question. There's a lot of people think that immigrants are coming in and it is at the expense of people who are already here, especially the native-born, especially minority workers. I do think that that is a very serious issue. I just think that immigrant advocates have as much responsibility to that as anyone else. And that if some people are left behind, it's not going to make good policy on immigration. As all of us who work on these issues at the local level, at the national level, unless you address all the systemic issues that are keeping low-wage immigrants at the lower level, all African Americans, we're not going to address the system even for the more enlightened immigration policy. We have to improve wages for everyone. Only then, I mean, the point I was making about what's caused about the strain in the labor market is our wage scale has gone down systematically since the 1970s. We have fewer enforcement in our workplace than we had even in 1970. Unless we improve the wages and the working conditions and the standards for everyone, it's not going to help either immigrants or the native-born workers.
Thank you. Very good question. Here we go.
Rendell Jones, Camden. I'm interested in Tim's chart concerning the reduction in deaths as evidencing reduction in violence. I'm wondering if you have considered the substantial improvements in medical care in conflict zones and how that chart might change if that consideration.
Yeah, God bless the doctors and nurses. But no, that doesn't explain going from 300 to 1.4. A lot of it's just driven by fewer and fewer, and there are other data points in this as well, fewer and fewer interstate conflicts, fewer and fewer civil wars. And I think it's not so much, we don't see the world anymore as, I think, as a conflict over resources, finite number of resources. We realize that there are infinite opportunities. Even in the United States, only 15% of our workforce is not in the service industry, whether they're growing food or whether manufacturing. We're already in the economy of the future. And so I think the rest of the world, as they've gone out of sort of a Malthusian trap into realizing economic growth is sort of unlimited. And it goes back to this previous question. Immigration is not like looking at a soccer team, right? So my son and daughters have played soccer. You hate it when you see a more talented goalie join the team. I'm out of a job. It doesn't work that way. We have an infinite number of people that can play on the field at the same time and strengthen one another. So I think that's been a witness now with economic growth, that there's no limit to human potential.
Let's get another question in here. It might be our final question, but not a question.
Actually, this is a great follow-up on the question for Tim. Again, the connection between the reduction in battlefield deaths and your connection to the reduction in violence. Yeah. There are much less intrastate conflicts and more interstate conflicts. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if this number takes into account deaths that are caused by suicide bombings, for example. I mean, the nature of violence has changed, which also I'm not sure whether these are being accounted for in that number. The last part of this question is because you made the direct correlation between this and why people leave, with the argument that people leave because we have better transportation. Yes, there are better transportation networks, but people don't leave because of this permanently. And I'm thinking particularly of refugees that are leaving conflict situations like Syria or Yemen or Afghanistan or Pakistan. I mean, people are leaving because they have to leave. They have no other choice, and because they are at risk. Yeah. It's not for better transportation.
There's a lot loaded in that. I can't even remember the first part, but I think it was the question about data is so fascinating. So I'm an economist, so I'd much rather talk about numbers than emotions. But the data are fascinating on how all sorts of violence has gone down. And I couldn't recommend this book or Max Roser's website, The World in Data, to look at some of these responses. I guess my final thought is it's a complex issue. And I'm not opposed to economic migration. No, I'm not. I wasn't disparaging. I'm making fun of myself. So I would just take, my final comment on that was that, that there are a lot of complex factors that drive people, and I didn't mean to diminish any of those. But I think the answer to this is when you see the contrast between the lack of growth that hasn't occurred in Honduras and El Salvador and Haiti, compared to really promising stories where we have alliances in Panama and Colombia. And so there's really good news around the world, and I'm optimistic that it won't just be, we shouldn't see the world through this lens of poor people that want to get here and we need to keep them out. We need to engage in alliances and help every country in the world to help reduce violence if they don't have the internal capacities.